Welcome to the Creative Industry Insight podcast, a podcast that looks at various roles in the creative world. I'm your host, Bobby. Today's guest, cinematographer Benjamin Kračun, joins us to talk about his work on Promising Young Woman. Please be warned, there are heavy spoilers in this episode, so make yourself comfortable as we jump into the conversation with Benjamin. Thank you for joining me today, Benjamin.
Thank you for having me.
I'm excited to talk about Promising Young Woman. I know it's not out in the UK just yet, but it will be out hopefully very soon, maybe even out when this episode comes out. There will be spoilers for people if they are listening. So maybe turn it off and come back later on, or if you have a morbid curiosity and want to spoil it, keep listening.
I think it's 12th, isn't it? It's out on the 12th.
Yeah, sounds about
something like that.
Was it the 12th or the 15th of February?
I think 12th for the 14th. So it's out on the Friday the 12th, but it's the release of it's Valentine's weekend.
Not a good film.
There you go. It's
maybe not a good Valentine's film to sit down with.
It was Emerald's choice. She said this is a perfect Valentine's movie. That gives you a sense of an insight into a sense of humor.
Very, very British and very morbid. I'm glad I didn't show this to my mum on Valentine's Day, for that wouldn't have gone down very well. But she enjoyed it. I think she was very surprised by the film. I think she went in with no expectation because you didn't see any of the press or any trailers.
That's the best way.
She was very surprised by it. Maybe enjoyed is not the right word, but because it's of the subject matter and everything. But she did pat me on the back for a good choice of film. So,
cool.
So I'll take that. I guess I should start from the beginning and ask about how did the project come about for you, and what made you want to take the job?
So I actually, maybe it was like spring 2000, I want to say 2018, spring 2018, I actually did a one-day shoot with Emerald, a little small short thing that she'd written, a satirical piece. And it was kind of like, it was very harmonious. We had a great time. She did mention like, I was at Sundance and I've got this feature. And she also had a short and she wanted to show me it, but that was about it really. We didn't have much, the day's shoot went and I was like, okay. I was kind of really struck by her. She's like incredibly intelligent and just like so funny, but like darkly funny. And in a way you're just sort of like, wow, okay, there's something there. And it wasn't like 7 months later, she just sent me the script basically kind of out the blue and was like, I've got money to make this, you know what I mean? And my debut feature, I've got like X amount. I'm going to make it in America and we're going out to these people. Are you interested in reading? At the same time, she had seen, because that's the same year that Beast was released, the film that I did with Michael Pierce, sort of 2 years previous. And that got released that May. And I think she'd seen that and really enjoyed it. Again, it's a sort of, they're not very similar tonally, however, they are kind of psychological thrillers, let's say. You know what I mean? There's a strong female lead, psychological thriller. And I think Emerald really responded to the end, like the discussion that the film made. I think there's sort of, you can even see online, there's sort of Reddit feeds about the end of Beast and who's the Beast and is Jesse the Beast. And it created some kind of cultural dialogue, and that's kind of very important for Emerald as well. So yeah, I read the script sort of that 9 months after we'd had that day's shoot. And at that time, I mean, the script was like really easy to read and very funny. And the last 30 pages were just so jaw-droppingly. So, I mean, you're just like, what have I just read? Like, I had to like reread it going like, oh my God, is that actually what happens? So even because that setup alone, I think people would do a movie just with that, with her setup, her sort of going out to pubs or clubs, and that's enough in itself. And then just to have it go that direction, I was like, wow. And also, you just don't meet that many people. Like when Emerald sent me, I started to kind of research Emerald a little bit and see what, because I didn't, at the time we did the one-day shoot, it wasn't like, it was just a little commercial thing. So at that point, I started to realize, well, she has like written 3 novels. She's been the showrunner on Killing Eve. She's got this money to make her debut feature in America. And it's like, that just doesn't happen all the time. Do you know what I mean? You don't meet people like that. That's sort of like, I've worked with a few debut directors and they've never got all those things together. So at the same time, it was all of this was kind of like, wow, okay, this is like something important. So I put together all these like images and stuff. And I had like read it much more, as DPs do. It was like much more in the shady area. It was much darker. I put like Gone Girl down and Magnolia, like really weighty, serious drama stuff. And I was like, yes, Anna's gonna get this job. Anyway, we had lunch and I sort of like show Emerald the stuff. And then she kind of like brings out her lookbook and it's just like full of like really bright pink bathrooms. It's got images of vertigo, very colorful. And she's like, I don't want to signpost anything in this movie. I want this movie to be like, this is the world. Emerald is also like that herself. If you ever meet Emerald, she'll have like pink sweaters. She's got like, she loves all that kind of stuff. And to be honest, at that point, I wasn't like, that almost was the final hook where I was just like, now I really want to get this job, because it was such a specific view. And I think as a DP, it's kind of like what I look for in a meeting or when I meet a director, because in a sense, we're all telling maybe similar stories over time and whatnot, but the things that make it different are how you're going to tell it and what your view on that is, or what's your specific take on that. And to so have a director who has got a specific take and they're not just like, oh, come and do whatever you like sort of thing. She's like, this is what I want. Are you into this? I like the movies you've done so far, but this is going to be different. And you're kind of like, you know what? Yeah, I'll definitely do that. And also, up until that point, I had made quite dark films. So for me to even get involved, this is a dark movie, let's be honest. Underneath it, it's a dark movie, like a very dark movie. But at the same time, the way it's presented was something new to me. So I was like, that's something I can really get into. A bit more high key, a bit more soft. And I can really kind of play with that. And the camera work and things like that, which we can get into, we discussed a lot, framing and stuff like that was very specific in the picture.
Yeah, because the film does have a very distinct look in terms of colors and color palettes. I guess if you do read what's on the page, you do get those ideas of Gone, as you mentioned, like Gone Girl, Magnolia, and thinking about, wow, this is going to be, we're going to shoot it with like a key light here and that's that. And then people coming out the shadows. It's a revenge film. It's going to be this, that, the other. And then you probably got presented like cupcake colors, being like, oh, okay. But I think that also adds to the
It's
film.
also because of her, because Cassie's character, because of her character, you always take like, she is still in stasis and in some kind of, she hasn't moved on since the event or whatever. And like, I think your normal approach to that is to, weight it a little bit more. Do you know what I mean? You'd have those close-ups of her looking out the window as it's raining and like, this world is all wrong. But I think that was like, and Emerald was really, again, she was like, no, what I do when I'm feeling really bad is actually, I do the opposite. I get really dressed up because you don't want the world to question you in that sense. You deflect it. You kind of hide in plain sight. The sort of.
I do have a color palette question that I'll go on to, but before, I just wanted to point out as well, like using those sort of bright colors and ideas, you kind of create like a false world, and it's sort of like the barrier between like what's going on with someone and what's being presented to people, but they don't know what's going on with them on the inside. But then also with it being so colorful as well, you don't really get a sense of where in America the film's taking place. I'm not sure if that's something that's intentional.
That is important. Yeah, that was it was originally, it's a non-suburban place. Yeah, it should be. And every place.
Yeah, it has that sort of Seven vibe where it just feels like it could be anywhere, but no one actually knows where it is, but it's something that could place anywhere in America. And yeah, you can tell by certain colors used as well in certain scenes. So you'd have the cupcake shop is what is one where it is very sort of pop music video-y with terms of like the blues, pinks, I think some of the reds that are used. And I guess you have that sort of fake, maybe that just shows like the sort of duality of Cassie's character, of her like living in this fake world, but she's like, there's like a lot of darkness hidden underneath. Even her house as well, where even think about it now when Alison Brie's character turns up and she kind of looks around the house and it's just like, wow, okay. It's very sort of,
You can't not mention it when you walk in.
yeah, it's like it's also
That's a
this,
time capsule. The house is a sort of time capsule. Yeah, when we found that house, we were like, yes, this is it. I mean, it actually still had, I think, the plastic on the seating and on the table, and yeah, the pink carpet. It's trapped in time somehow, yeah. And also then if you go back, because then into her bedroom, she's trapped there probably from the moment Nina committed suicide or whatnot was from that. So she hasn't moved. That part's the sort of trapped in time part. Then the coffee shop, in a sense, where she works, is her only, that's where her only friend really is. And it's where she meets Ryan, who you think is going to save her, or like, you know, she's going to be the love interest and that's actually going to work out. So it's kind of like a little more happy space in a way. So that's the most poppy in that sense. But you're right that it's tweaked, like the whole world. We're not in a, it has a fantasy element to it. I use it like, yeah, like a rape revenge fantasy type world. We're not in a real world as such. But what we're discussing is very contemporary and very difficult to take kind of thing. And that's, I think that's having that mix. It actually, you can sort of discuss it further because the world isn't completely recognizable in that way. So people kind of take it. And also, you know, it's very funny. The dialogue's very funny. I think like now I speak about the movie and everyone's like, it's so dark and these so contemporary. But the other thing that was Emerald was always, or we'd both discussed, is that we kind of wanted to make a thrilling film as well, like a fun film to watch in places. Like you should laugh, you know, it could be uncomfortable, of course, and it is, but it's also like there should be an enjoyment level to it. It's not an art house. It's not the kind of serious art house drama. We were trying to make just like a fun movie popcorn film on the surface. You know,
but those are the best kind of films where you have deeper meaning in stuff, and it's very hard to sort of, because I don't want to say stuff out of turn about the film in terms of, because it has, you're right, in parts where you will laugh uncomfortably, and that's just maybe that's just a normal human reaction, because when certain things make you uncomfortable or certain situations, like, you know, when you get shouted at work or something,
yeah,
by your parents, like you can't help but laugh sometimes because you're just like, I'm so fucked. And then
that can be a reaction. That's it.
yeah.
Yeah.
But with the color palette of the film, what films did you use as a reference to sort of get that similar vibe and look? And then how would you create it on set? So like how would places like the coffee shop would be brightly lit? Would that use a lot more natural lighting, or would that be sort of rigs?
So everything. Well, I'll start with the references. So as I say, I came in with quite serious, weighty stuff, much more shadowy. There was actually a couple of references that matched up. Like I had a image of Nicole Kidman from To Die For, which Emerald also had. And I think like there were references were like, you know, Clueless, Vertigo, To Die For, Heathers, pictures, a lot of 90s stuff as well. And there was like photographers and maybe even like stuff from David LaChapelle and things that were, yeah, they had a definite kind of bright aesthetic in that sense. So I knew from that Emerald was going to be, you know, there's going to be a lot of work done with costume. It ended up being Nancy Steiner, who's amazing. Like even that, because in my references, I had an image of Julianne Moore in Safe. You ever seen Safe? Great picture. Anyway, it's like it's a really good film. But in that film, it does these amazing like they zoom out like really, really slowly. She's sort of completely alienated from the world. I think even she has this condition where she ends up she can't go outside. Like air is actually affecting her or whatever. But it just has these amazing shots. And I remember her standing in like this living room. I remember showing it. And then so yeah, Emerald was like, oh, Nancy's on board. And then Michael Perry, the designer, he did like It Follows, Under the Silver Lake. So we kind of like, I knew that like this was going to be, because it's the aesthetic of it was so particular, it was going to be like, we're going to all like work together here. So Michael had these ideas of this coffee shop. So in a sense, I knew that that was going to be, he's going to use blue a lot there, like soft blues. And like, so in that sense, and it's all, then the next part of it was it's all location. Like we're shooting, it's not, there's no builds. However, there were like builds within existing spaces. So that coffee shop might have been an industrial space. I think it was downtown in LA, East LA. So if you imagine you open that door, which I don't think you see, because if you open that door, it's like you're downtown in LA. It would look totally out, like not in the movie at all. But it did have this amazing glass front to it. And then we decided, you know, if we build it this way, then this could be like, we could just cross light it and we could put a frosting on. I think it had like clouds on it. And I built like, yeah, we had like tabletopped it, built a full rig outside. And I'd put like, it's probably like 218s, but everything in that sense with lighting was soft. Like I wanted to keep it, again, in the same way that Emerald wasn't wanting to highlight exactly where the film was going. And she wanted it to have that sort of be seductive in a kind of way to watch it. I was like, well, let's keep all the lighting as soft and crosslit as possible. So there's not that much hard light there. Possibly we can get into, yeah, as she goes out and does her ruse in the evenings or whatever, there's more color stuff that comes in. But with the cafe, I knew they were going to be making it bright anyway, and all the cupcakes and all the things. So in a way, I kept that lighting. Maybe it was a slight warm. We would have had a straw on it or a seat, like quarter CTO, and just had that beautiful, I could just cross light most of the scenes, you know. And then you can let them play out, you know, her and Bo Burnham, and they can riff off each other, and it's not too, I don't bring in too many things on the floor, you know.
Is that the same if you're blocking a scene? If you see how like the scene plays out and how the actors move around, do you change the lighting then, or do you just make like small tweaks, or is it just a case of like didn't plan it like that in my mind?
I mean, that depends picture to picture and obviously also scene to scene. But I guess the other thing on this film to keep in mind was it was a low budget indie movie and we didn't have a lot of time. So it was 23 days. So a lot of these locations we were actually getting in, having to rig, then shoot the scene, then de-rig, like all in a day, you know, like, which is mad because you definitely do not want to be like rigging whilst the director walks in. It's kind of like putting up a naked painting of yourself or whatever. You know what I mean? You don't want, at that point, it's too early to show. And obviously there's going to be crude things about it. And you're like, oh, don't see that. Like, someone keep Emerald over there while I just like do all this. But so in that sense, the thing that we did do early on, which is very useful when you got no time, is, you know, we prepped as much as we could. Like we tried to shot list, even though you don't know exactly how they're going to move, but you can tell like Cassie works at the coffee shop. I know from Michael's design that that's going to be there, and this is where you go if you want to get a coffee. You know what I mean? So you can kind of start to block it out, and you do it with little stick figures and whatnot. And we did shot list pretty much the whole movie. We didn't storyboard any of it because we didn't have time or resources for that, but that did kind of help. And then I knew from that space was mostly, and it does go into early evening, which I then created by, it had these shutters on it that you could roll down that were actually in the building, and I sort of like would use them from time to time, and a lot of negative because it's white space to create different shapes in there. But it wasn't, in that way, that was a easier space to control for the actors. You know, I like to give them as much room as they can on the floor, but at exactly the same time, depending if you're getting into a psychological moment or a moment where we need to be a bit more high end, or then I'm bringing in a few more things. You know, like there's a Cassie on her computer and the computer's like breathing, you know, which computers don't do. They don't breathe. But it was like a way to like, I wanted to get inside her head. That's also where she starts her mission. She does all these things. So there we would have, I timed it all to this like screensaver that the art department had made. And we timed all the lights and programmed it all in. And I even had like tubes on the floor going around the bed, and it would go up, it would light up and go black, dark and light at the right time. So that was obviously in that space, it's slightly different. But rule of thumb, I try and keep it free as much as possible. But then, if it's an intense scene or you're going in, I do feel like you want to create, you want to keep it, you want to shape it as much as you can as well. It's not a freestyle. It wasn't going to be a freestyle movie. Like, it's not handheld, run around. We're in a different world.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the computer screen when it's breathing, because that was quite unsettling. And I think when I first watched it, I wondered what the light source was, because it's just you don't see the light source, you just see it lighting up on Cassie, and you at first you might think it's a car of some sort in terms of the way that it's rolled. Cars might be rolling by or something. But you're mentioning as well that you shot the film in 23 days, which is crazy to think. It just because it runs just under 2 hours. So for people,
just over.
Is it just over 2 hours?
No, you're right. No, you're right. 100. Sorry, 100. You're right. 113 or something. Yeah, just under 2 hours.
So I guess that's in 23 days to do effectively 113 pages of script. That comes out to more than 10 pages a day, which is something that's like really unheard of.
I was shocked when I got sent that time schedule. I was like, I have to say that, like, in the States, that's much more. They have, like, at that stage, this might have changed in the last year or so, but at that time they had, for indies, they would have the tier system, and it's like goes from tier 0 to like 9 or whatnot. And this was like a tier 1. So that's very low in the scale. And most tier 1 films are shot 23 days. So when I had like sort of got there and I was like, guys, should we not just like at least add 2 more days? Because this is kind of crazy, this schedule. And, I think like the line producer at the time, she was like, I think we should make this movie in 19. I'm surprised it's got 23 days. And I was kind of like, because then they'll start telling you, it's all that stuff, isn't it? Whiplash was 19 days. Moonlight was 20. Moonlight was tier 0, so they had less. It's like, that's amazing that movie went on to the Oscars, and all that kind of stuff. So there is a sort of tradition in that sense, and I guess it's comes from because it's also unionized in the States. So the days always amount, you can exactly count up exactly how much money a day is and stuff like that. But anyway, not to get too into that because it's kind of a bit boring. But the fact is, it was going to be tight and we were going to be running really fast. But we wanted to make a really taut thriller where everything was thought about and everything was decided as kind of precise as Cassie is with our little plan. We were like, this film has to be like really precise. So there was like a lot to get on with. And I guess the only thing that I do or try and always do in that case is I go, well, can I come out earlier because we're going to need all the prep time we can get, because every single second in a location or every single bus journey or every single question I can ask Emerald to get information is going to be helpful, because you can't turn up on the fly and shoot a movie like that. No, it wouldn't work. You wouldn't have the time.
I'm still trying to get my head around somebody saying 19 days.
I know, but you'll be surprised with what's been shot in 19 days and how it works. And usually it's Steven Soderbergh who's bringing all these things right down to like 5 days, and he's edited it in 4 and it's going to come out. I mean, he's kind of a genius at that if you're into that type of thing. But
maybe because I'm so used to like the British system, where I think we did an hour and a half film and we shot that in 5 weeks. And that felt a bit tight, and I understand when they have other examples of this film was shot in this, that, and you just think,
I know, you can't really compare.
No, especially I think with Whiplash, I think they rented one building block or like one sort of area and just built all the sets there.
Yeah, of course,
something along those lines. But then when I see something like Promising Young Woman, where you think of the different sets in terms of, you've got the house, you've got the cabin in the woods, you've got the wedding, you've got the coffee shop, you've got the hospital, you've got
every day is a different location. Every day
you've got
all the apartments, you've got the clubs. You've got
Yeah,
the
and like
street scenes. You've
don't know
got the
how you schedule that, but yeah, it just mind explodes. But when you're planning a shoot, so like a shoot that's going to be so tight, like where do you begin? Because you said there's only, I know it's a very broad question, but what is your process to sort of making sure that you're ready when it comes to day one of 23?
I mean, first of all, yeah, you don't. I mean, because the AD is obviously working on the schedule at the same time. Another interesting thing with this movie was it was my first movie in the States. So it's the first time I was over in the States. We weren't actually, originally, it was going to be shooting in, I want to say, Cleveland, Ohio. And it had a bit more budget because the thing in America is depending where you go, you get more cash. You know, they always have certain states open up, and then you'll see that every movie that year is shot in like New Orleans because that year New Orleans had that big break. So, but the movie moved to LA and took a hit. So it was made for less. We had less money. However, which I think was the right move, Emerald was like, I can get better cast this way. Do you know what I mean? We can get, and this the script itself had these sort of set pieces, if you like. You know, you've got Alison Brie, Connie Britton, Jennifer Coolidge. You know, you just get like a lot of great people, and they're going to come in for a day or maybe two, and you can get them. If you was shooting in Cleveland, Ohio, that would be a different story. So when you know those things and you start breaking it down into, first of all, you've got to get into, I usually think the best way to approach it is always to kind of break it up and you obviously deal with it day by day even. And you don't think of the whole, if you start thinking of the whole thing in 23 days, your mind's just going to explode. So you have to kind of like get into like, you know, like you go into it like day one. I mean, day one, we did the Alison Brie scene. I think that was our day one, which is a big scene. But at that same time, you know roughly where they're going to be. They're going to be seated. It's a lunch. It's like a boozy lunch scene. And with that, you sort of you've built, me and Emerald have spoke a lot about what the camera's going to do. Emerald had these ideas and she was like, could we make the camera predatory? And I was like thinking about that. So then you'll see in that scene, the minute she mentions the name Nina, like, do you remember Nina? The camera will start like moving, almost like it's circling its prey kind of thing. So I think like all of that discussion and all that, getting all that information early, it really softens. You're not having those discussions on set in those 12 hours that you've got where you have to shoot your 9 pages or whatnot. I don't think we actually had a 9-page day though. I'm getting quite I think we might have had with dialogue scenes, they might have gone up to that. But again, it was also single camera most of it. So you have to remember that we didn't have like 2 camera bodies all the time or anything like that. But you sort of approach it in pieces and you start building from there. And within the script, there was also things that Emerald was very definite about because she had such specific ideas. And what I was saying earlier was that's always really great because when they are definite, you can sort of have like a dance or start sparring. Like she'll go like, she knew that sort of the scene in the cabin, the kind of like major scene and twist in the movie, if you like she knew that had to be one shot and it was going to be one unbroken shot. That was something she already had in there, and she had already worked out that someone of the weight of Cassie, height, weight, and that this would be the time length it would take for this act to happen. Like she had that written down to like 2 minutes 37. That's exactly how long it takes for you to do that to someone or whatever. And so from there, you're like, she's like, oh, and I'm like, that's amazing. Okay, we'll do it as one shot. Then I was like, well, what if that shot is creeping in really slowly? So the whole thing's flipped, where you've had Cassie doing her going out at weekends, entrapping guys and confronting them about how dodgy they are. It's flipped round and this camera's like moving in on her. So these things just start to build and build. And I think you end up, hopefully, where you're not concerned so much by the time and you're just kind of, you're knocking them down. You know what I mean? It's obviously difficult to hit home runs every day. And I wouldn't say that like there are many pieces I watch in the movie and I would like to do them differently, but that's going to be on every film, I think.
If you're a perfectionist, and again, some people find it difficult to watch their own works, there's always certain things where you're like, oh, look at this. Oh, I can see that there, and then the person next to you is like, what are you talking about? I got that, because you always notice there'll always be days as well if you're watching back your own work where you'll be like, I remember that day, I remember this, that, the other. I wish we just could have done this take or this one. But when you're on so constraint, you pretty much you probably have everything planned to a T, but then you probably try to sort of change it around if you have time, or maybe do something a little bit differently. And as well, you mentioned about the camera moving in and becoming like this predator. You can see that sort of changes like gradually in the film, because I read somewhere else as well that like it starts off quite static, and then it
Yeah, that's yeah.
slowly starts becoming like coming to alive, I guess, like the sort of
When she starts her mission, if you like. Yeah, when that becomes more definite, it does have more pace to it, I guess.
yeah, and then it adds more to the story as well, because you've got, instead of, you have like that sort of kinetic energy on the screen, and it's like showing pace, and something's creeping up on you, like to this big finale and everything.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It did have the staticness at the beginning was also from the other way that I always like to approach a picture in a sense. I mean, I love it if the camera has some type of character and is as subjective as it can be at points, especially when you're dealing with thriller or psychological thriller or anything where you can play with that or play with the audience. I think it's always like useful. And in a sense, the camera is going to be, it kind of comes from where Cassie is in her life. And in that sense, she's in stasis at the beginning of the film. We don't completely know what's going on, but you know that there might be something up. She's quite prickly, if you like. She's quite, do you know what I mean? She has sort of a front. And yeah, like in the home is sort of trapped in time. She's sort of trapped probably in exactly the same place she was 7 years ago or whatever. There's a kind of trauma in that sense. So in that way, it made very much sense that the camera would play with that static frame. And also, this goes back to like when we chose, because when I'd read it, I'd seen it in widescreen from when I first read it. And then we started to discuss, when we looked at these lenses, I ended up getting these G series lenses from Panavision in Hollywood. And they, when we put them up and looked at them, they just had this perfect sort of, they have slight aberrations and things. They're slightly softer, but they're not so much that it takes you out of the movie, or they're not like drawing attention to themselves. But at the same time, you could start thinking about like using negative space with that. So in the beginning, she's in stasis. It's also like, what's happening here? She is grieving, or she wants revenge for her friend who isn't around. Like that's the main story, her best friend. And they were like best friends. So in a sense, to start using the negative space almost in a way of to help, like you could almost see it like her friend's missing from that frame. You know what I mean? If you were like watching her talk to Madison, played by Alison Brie, in that restaurant, you could maybe start imagining is Nina like on one of these other tables, or what's going on. And I think that idea that you have to slightly think as well, I kind of like really enjoy putting in, and especially in a movie where you're presented with maybe a much more colorful and cozy and soft world, just to keep it that like actually not everything is how it seems.
It's like another sort of way of showing how empty somebody's life is without someone else.
Yeah,
in a way.
Yeah.
And I was kind of did want to get onto the sort of, because you mentioned about lens choices and using G series anamorphic. I know a lot of people might not know what that means, so I probably might need a small explanation from you, sort of thing, a simple thing. But I would go back to that in 1 second. But I just want to mention as well, because if you're working with someone who's like a first-time feature director, and then does that mean you take more of a hands-on approach? So in terms of like lens choices, or sort of communicating the visual idea of like how the camera is going to work and move in the film?
I mean, like I say, the best way I've always found is to firstly just listen, whether it's first time director or any director, to be honest. Again, going out early, listening to what Emerald's saying, listening and suggesting. I think what was very clear here was that Emerald had a very specific vision. She is a writer. She has been on set since she was 14. You know, she was an actress as well. She still is, or she's in The Crown and things like that. So she knows how sets work. Okay, it's still her debut picture, but she definitely knew what she wanted, I would say. So I would only like maybe suggest more or put in more if I feel like that space is there to be where it's like if I can really help or solve a problem or whatnot. But I think with this film, it was much more about us getting on the same page before through these references and through discussing where Cassie is, where her character is, what's going to happen, and really kind of like we sort of had to have that down, really. You know what I mean? I guess with like the lenses, like I say, suggesting, I would just say, well, to me, I read that script and Emerald would say it herself, you know, she was talking to me about Greek mythology. I think Cassandra, even the name is from Greek mythology. And she discussed those kind of character journeys quite a lot, you know what I mean? And there's almost, you can look at it like that. You can almost look at the end, it's almost fairy tale-esque. She's going to the wolf's lair at the end. To me, everything that she's pointing at, even though she didn't say anamorphic, was like, to me, that those lenses kind of help also to take it a little step away from that real world. So they also help to make it this movie, they make it this sort of thrilling ride, but they also give it a kind of mythic element, which is sometimes with spherical because we see it on the TV more, or most of our telly, you know, they're much more joined to how we see regularly. Anamorphic does distort how we're seeing, and it puts much more in the frame in a sense. I mean, it's wide, you know, it's much wider. And you know what? Primarily used and developed for Westerns. So almost like in a way of like to own it as a female filmmaker for Emerald to be like, you know, because it's kind of like male dominated, that sort of the anamorphic thing, in a sense. This is in a small way. I wouldn't say, you know, I'm not going to get too into that. But I think
you mentioned it as well before that it was a sort of the camera slightly predatory in terms of movement and you want to get that look. I also read that it was very sort of using the G series as well helped sort of create like a wildlife feel to it. I might be completely misquoting what you said, so apologies.
I think that was more the movement, or well, the idea that like if the elk is sitting and it's sort of you see the lion kind of creeping around, you get that. I guess that's just, yeah, in a feeling, it's like that's the tension building or the screws turning or that should be coming across in that. I mean, I don't want anyone to particularly notice these things either. That's the other thing. You don't want to, you think that I know it and people in the industry maybe know it, but you should watch it and maybe just be slightly at unease.
Yeah.
In that sense.
I think we'll go with that so we don't make people too conscious about the movement. But there's also times in the film where you've framed people dead center in the screen. There's times where Cassie's character, I guess, is when she's framed deliberately to look like an angel and an angel of like vengeance. And then there's other times when they're in the dean's office and the dean is center of the screen as well. And then there's another scene as well that comes to mind is when she goes to see the lawyer Alfred Molina. Thank you. Thank you. What is the sort of meaning and idea of having them?
So that again is also, I mean, it's Cassie mostly who, that is also from the mythology and also something that Emerald had discussed a lot, which was the avenging angel idea. And I think then like Michael, the designer, had tried to find like, you know, he had beds with wing, it has like the angel wing shape and things like that. Because when she decides to go on her mission, she is like, I mean, that's what she's doing. She's dishing out either punishment or redemption. These are two things. She actually, because Emerald also always said to me, and I think is that this film, it's a film about forgiveness as much as it is about revenge. And that's kind of interesting in the film. And it's great that you mentioned Alfred Molina, because in that fact, he's the only character who gets forgiven, which is kind of interesting. It doesn't usually happen in a film like this that's about revenge or about this kind of incident or whatever. They usually, it's all just pure revenge, and there isn't any discussion of forgiveness. But I think she tries to offer that up with everyone she meets. Even Madison, she says, like, did you remember? Like, Madison, she's asking them, like, just own up, tell the truth, but they don't. No one does. So she sort of dishes out her type of vengeance. And I think just to kind of put her into that kind of slightly mythical, more, mythic state, if you like, we would play those central frames at those times. Or you'll see that red comes up quite a bit in these scenes as well, once it's at the very end of them. Like in the restaurant, I think it's the lampshade. So Michael painted it, and I would put like light into it so it would kind of stand out. Or when she leaves Neil's flat, and then she's got a red as she walks out. So we would play these kind of, I wouldn't say there was such a completely, there was sort of where we would put her into that sort of space.
Yeah, you kind of want to because it's not overdone in the film. It's not every scene somebody's central in it.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
It's just it happens on the confronting scenes when when it comes to confronting people about Nina. But I think there was a scene with the Alfred Molina one stands.
They're very central. They're very, very central. It's also there's quite static, central, framed. I guess, it's an interesting scene because he's been waiting for her. I think she, in a weird way, that would have taken her by surprise in that one, because he's obviously was quite a key character in like what had happened to Nina, do you know what I mean? And how they were operating and all that as a lawyer. They're never like tasteful characters. But no. I think like him even answering the door and saying like, I think he says, I've been expecting you. Then he's living in complete, like his life's a mess. I mean, it's like destroyed. And he kind of, I guess what changes there is that, he's basically begging for some type of forgiveness, to be like, that he can get this off his chest, and she grants him that. So they're kind of like both on a level by the end of it, in a sense.
The scene did remind me a little bit of Boogie Nights. Incidentally, had the same scene with another one with Alfred Molina in it, when he's buying coke off Mark Wahlberg and other people, and it didn't have that same sort of like frenetic energy, but it just had that same sort of mood and vibe, because even though he's asking for forgiveness, there's just something there that you don't know if he's going to snap, because
he's completely on edge psychologically.
And you just don't know if he, even though he's asking for forgiveness, you don't know what sort of extent he's going to go to for it. And I think that even scares Cassie in the scene as well.
Because he comes close and she kind of
and it's just, I think that was a moment where I kind of thought, oh wow, this is going to be this is going to take like a really another dark turn. But it just didn't. Just kind of changed a little bit, and it was I think that was probably my favorite scene.
That's interesting. That's your I think it's a really key scene. It's not one that's discussed a lot, I've seen, but it's I think it's a really key scene in terms of what this movie is and what that scene means in terms of this thing I'm talking about with forgiveness, because that's ultimately where I guess the conversation at the end of the day and about this film and what the film is trying to say and trying to open up that dialogue, ultimately we have to all get to a place where we can deal with forgiveness and stuff. You know what I mean? Like that. Otherwise it doesn't go forward. So it's kind of, the film, you don't watch it in that theoretical manner, but I think it's interesting that you point that out, that was a key scene for you. And it's kind of nice because we crossed the line, we jumped the line when Alfred then, at the point where he asks for forgiveness. So I think like up until that point, there is a tension and you don't know what he's going to do. And then when you realize actually, he's really messed up and he does want forgiveness, we kind of go behind the couch and it sort of changes in that way. It was also a scene that this got cut out, probably good, but we did actually set up towards the end of the movie, after the sort of penultimate big twist scene, there's the kind of light that comes through the window. I had a similar setup there, and we actually filmed it. And that was taken from, because Emerald had this idea, like the Michelangelo Pieta, and she was like, what if like a light came down? But it was just like, it was really pretentious. I mean, we did it, but it would have stuck out, like really, wouldn't have worked there. Or even it wouldn't have worked, it would have been it just would have been too much, and maybe foreshadowed what it would have taken away, I guess, from that latter scene. But it's something that was in our mind, like where this was going to end up was at that point. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah, it was.
I guess
it was kind of cut out because maybe it just felt too on the nose and just too sort of.
Yeah.
But the interesting part though as well, there's something that's popped into my mind. I should have mentioned a bit earlier, but when you were in pre-production, did you create any sort of rules in terms of things that you sort of listed that you didn't want to break when making the film? It's just something that popped into my mind because I was listening to a podcast about The Godfather and how Francis Ford Coppola and his DOP created rules that they will only do certain things to sort of, they wanted to sort of shoot it like a 40s film, and then sometimes they would break the rules because they wanted to make it look good.
Yeah. I think like it's an interesting point, and it's like, going back to like, it was a low budget, we didn't have very many means, we did it in 23 days. I think what I often do in pre-production, and because often you don't know exactly how it's going to go, but yeah, you start reducing things down. So you know what you don't want, you know what I mean? And I guess the rules can come from that. And that also, like, what cards you have to play with. We've got one camera, we don't have rigs or tracks or cranes or things all the time. We have like, these are all down to like, I knew that I'd have it for 2 days. I knew that we'd have one drone shot, we'd have one, and then I would like, so yeah, you start to go like, well, we're not going to move the camera that much, and does that work for where Cassie is? And you would bring all that to the table, I guess. I mean, I'm trying to think of like, I think the first time you're really close on Cassie's face, I know there's a sort of oblique close shot when she's in the club at the beginning, but other than like a close up on Cassie's face, that was already, you're quite a bit into the movie and she hears the name Al Monroe. I think that's the first time we go right into Cassie's face. Other than that, you don't see her like that. You sort of see her in mid or whatnot, but it doesn't go that close to her. And I think, so things like that, we knew it was like, well, that's going to be the moment. So up until that point, we never go right into her face. Or, for example, in the house, when we looked at that house and I took a shot looking down the living room, there was the living room, the hallway, the dining room, the kitchen, you could like have this great long shot. And there was a chair in the kitchen. And even if it wasn't written that way, it was like a great way to like single Cassie out, So I was like, well, if she sat there, then like that would mean the two parents sit opposite her. And then it's like, well, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And what if the two parents are always shown in a two shot? They don't actually have you know what I mean? They're like their parents. I mean, when they're shown together in those kind of positions. So there you're already making decisions that are key to the form, but also economic, but solid, hopefully. Do you know what I mean? I think it's always best. Like, I think you can tell when you watch a movie if thought's gone into it. And I think that's the kind of key thing to keep audiences. I do that when I watch a film. It takes me about a minute when I turn a film on. If I know that like people have thought about this, but it's much more enjoyable for you to take them on the ride. And I think, yeah, because I don't know if I didn't have a list of rules on this one. I have had on other films, but we definitely reduced it down to elements that we could then play them quite strongly, i.e. the close up. And then taking into like when there's bursts of movement, she gets out of the car and smashes up the car with a tire iron. I think that's the first time it's a Steadicam shot and it's almost a single take. So it was we could write that in because you knew that like up until then it's been quite static. It would have quite an impact. The impact isn't diminished at that time because you haven't used it much. And I think, then there's only one other Steadicam. Once she sees the video and goes outside, I think there's another one. And the crane shot we used when she goes up to the cabin, the kind of Little Red Riding Hood going up to the wolf's lair, if you like. So yeah, in a strange way, it was like reducing it down, paring it back, and going like, what are the strongest cards and when can you play them so they have full impact? Not in a sort of grandiose way, but
using it as like a great, because there's a visual medium, sort of luring the audience in kind of thing. But no, there's still I guess when you create sort of rules as well, it does help you like prep and understand what you want to go for and what's going to give like the biggest punch for certain scenes.
I mean, inadvertently, you're probably doing it all the time kind of thing in a sort of strange way. Depending on how you work, maybe some people just build and put more and more and bring in more things, but it wasn't like that was an option. It wasn't like, oh, there's just going to be loads of money that will appear and we'll be able to do. In that sense, it would have been useful maybe to have a second camera body with bigger scenes and things like that. But I often try and stay away from sort of jumping on something that's a big technical thing, or like, let's just throw this piece of kit at it or something like that. Because I think like the film, like I say, bringing it back to where's the film at, where are we in the story, where are we with Cassie? I think you can do quite a lot with what means you have, i.e. where you're putting her in the frame, if the frame moves or doesn't. There already can be quite big moments. So yeah, it wasn't, yeah. I don't know if that completely answers it, but
no, it's just another way of getting into the thought process of how somebody plans, and I guess it depends, like, you know, different sort of director to director and genre to genre, what you want to establish on the film and how it's sort of the whole vibe of it, really. But I guess this leads to my sort of penultimate question. How have you found the reaction to the film?
Oh yeah, it's been amazing. So I mean, I'm really from the moment. I mean, quite really interesting. It's always followed this line from, because when we read the script or when I joined the film, you know, Kerry wasn't on board. There were a lot of things that were, you were kind of at each stage, it got more and more exciting in that sense. And it kind of changed at each stage. So once I was grading the film, it was like, wow, you know, we were kind of really into it. And Katie Jordan graded it at Harbour in Santa Monica. And we sort of brought out all these colors. And I was thinking, wow, this is like, it's getting better and better. But at that time, no one had seen it. And you don't really know. It might not be any good. You know, it's really difficult to tell until an audience actually sees it. That's the kind of thing. And then it got into Sundance. I think we found out on the second last day of the grade. And then I was like, wow, okay. I've never had Beast was shown at Sundance, but it didn't premiere there. And then this was going to premiere on the Saturday night at Sundance. And then, so when we went out there, that was the time when, like, sitting in a full audience, no one had ever seen it. We didn't know if it was any good. It's not that, you know, it's good. You know, we like it, but these are things that it is subjective in a sense. Do you know what I mean? It's very difficult, and especially with a movie like that, our audience is going to get it when this happens at the end. And it was like, I have to say, that reaction and that audience at that moment was like, I've never experienced anything quite like that. You know, they were getting involved in the film, and there were these like sort of uncomfortable laughs, and there were like shocks. It was just like, it was really interactive in that sense. That's kind of like, yeah. And I tell you, when I knew that it was something really special was when that scene happens. The scene that follows directly afterwards, if the audience laugh then, which they do, it's like, that guy's funny. Like, there's something so darkly, and kind of, that's exactly what would happen. And it's, if that happens and the audience get it and they stay with it, I knew from that point, it was like, this works. This is great. Yeah, you know, to do that, that's like a U-turn. It's like you've sat through to that point and you're hopefully just shocked. And then you've got the kind of beginning of the cover up, and it's like, you're either with it or you're not. And I think the audience really, like, that point, I just knew, I was like, wow, they're really with it. And then so since then, it's just there's obviously people who it's not going to be for everyone. I mean, come on, if you're not into that kind of style or colors are too garish, I can tell. It's not like I don't expect everybody to like it, but I think it speaks to a large percentage of people.
It's funny though when you're mentioning as well but that first night you must be all sort of looking at one another, being like, "Wow, this is going to be the first time where we haven't." Because you must have seen the film a number of times, and it's probably subconsciously, beat for beat, where like, okay, this is where this sort of reaction happens. Was that sort of nerve-wracking as well, looking around as well at sort of random people looking at it and just reacting to it?
Yeah,
in
it's
that
an
sort of way?
amazing that I hadn't been in any of the. I think Emerald and Kerry had been to either. There had been like audience or press screen and stuff before. So yeah, but it's like I always like to sit a little bit further back, and literally I'm watching the audience as much as the film to see what those reactions are. And it is really, really nerve-wracking because it could just sink. And you do hear about films that just they work and they don't work, and there is a sort of alchemy that is not like there isn't a perfect, no one knows the exact algorithm for it, and hopefully there will never be an algorithm for that, because it's something that occurs from a number of different things coming together, and that's what's really special in that time. But yeah, we were all there was like the editor was there, and like everyone was sitting, we were all kind of in a row. But yeah, the reaction was kind of like really special. You could really feel it. That's the only shame of this whole COVID. Well, many shames of the COVID thing, but the film in itself is so good in the cinema. It does really work. I know that like everyone's been watching it, or they will watch it streaming at home with maybe one or two others or their family or whatnot. But it really, I think, should also be watched in a group close to like other humans, because that's when you also, you're questioning yourself and things like that.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those films where you'd probably, once the lights sort of come on and you look at each person and just like, what did I watch? In terms of just like, wow, not as in like, oh my gosh, what did I do? That's another experience I've heard where you turn around to everybody and everyone's just like, wow, can't believe that. But then that's the way that like films should be experienced, is with audiences and people's reactions and everything. They, when
Yeah,
you
for sure.
hit certain beats and you see somebody laughing or like crying or whatnot, I think that heightens your experience as well, knowing that you're in a room of people that kind of appreciate it and understand it. I guess my final question is, what's next for you?
Well, I just finished. I was lucky enough to actually shoot a film in the pandemic. So I did. I literally just finished. So we went out to. I also shot in California, parts in LA, but mostly all around California. It's like a sort of sci-fi road movie by the director who I did Beast with. Yeah, and that shot. I literally got back just before Christmas. I was sort of out in the States during that whole time of the elections and the demonstrations, and the mountains were on fire. It was like the end of the world. COVID, burning mountains, Trump's still in. I was like, this is it. It's over.
It seems to all have gone back to normal once you left, so there might be a sign of some sort.
That's it, exactly. It was all so yeah, and now I'm just I'm reading, sort of eyeing up a few things, but also trying to pick the right project next, I guess. I also wonder if not everything has come out of the gate, if you know what I mean, because we're still, things are, until like that light at the end of the tunnel is definitely clear and the escape from COVID, the plan is solid, then I think like a lot more stuff is going to start happening. I mean, fingers crossed it goes back. There'll probably be I'm hoping there's just going to be this flood of amazing stuff. Everyone's waiting to get going,
It just like the domino effect, just waiting that one little thing and everything falls into place. There's still a lot
Exactly.
going on, but you hear about all these companies plowing like billions into production in the UK and stuff, and it's just you kind of like you lick your lips at the opportunity of what's going to be around the corner and what's going to be
Yeah.
good to sort of come and go on board.
Yeah, and also which stories to now tell and what to, to think about it a little bit.
Well,
What might be next to
I
do.
think they just announced like a COVID drama about Boris
Oh no,
Johnson's sort of response, and it's just like
no one's going to want to watch
I
that.
don't want to watch that. No, like I don't want to be reliving something that was awful again, dramatized and
Oh no, I think that all that stuff is a definite no. I mean, it's exactly not what we want. It's more like what to take from all that. Yeah, what has it highlighted? There'll be things, but I think like
no, that's
sort of
good.
finding that next project. Yeah.
Look, you've got something. You've got a lot of good stuff on your CV, so I'm sure you'll have a lot of stuff that you can cherry pick and have a lot of fun with. On that note, Benjamin Kračun, thank you very much for joining me and spending some time out of your day to talk to me about Promising Young Woman. I'm from the top of my head, I'm going to say I have no idea when it comes out in the UK because I don't want to give out wrong information and then people come after me in this sort of crazy internet age. But it's out now. It's streaming in America on Amazon, and if you get a chance, definitely go check it out.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you
for
very
having
much.
me.
No, thank you. Take care and bye bye. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.